Hi, welcome back to Rebel Movement Podcast. My name is Billy. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and I'm glad you're here. I want to talk a bit about queer inclusivity, and this is a conversation that is really a big one, and there are many different voices on it. If you're very new to queer inclusivity work, um, I will have some resources or some on my website. Um, and I will give you some stuff at the end for where you can get more information and we can do a little bit more work together with this. Um, as I said, I am not the only one doing this work. There's lots of people who are doing this work, and um, I would really encourage you to broaden your following or who you follow, and start to follow more queer voices because their voices deserve to be heard. So I want to talk a little bit specifically about queer inclusivity in movement spaces. And I thought I would start with talking a little bit about why it matters, or like moments where like you might be thinking, I have a studio, like it doesn't come up, like why does it matter? It doesn't show up in my space. I don't know. I've never noticed anything or whatever. And I just thought I would start off with a couple of examples of why, like, of times where how do I say this? Times where it should have mattered, but it didn't. Does that make sense? Probably not. Examples of where it might be showing up in your space and, um, and I will talk about a little bit about how, like, alternative approaches. Cool. Before I start, I will say that if you are a business owner within Canada, there is an amazing organization called Rainbow Registered that, I mean, if you're a consumer, you can go to the Rainbow Registered website and see a list of Rainbow Registered businesses, which is like they have a governing, they're not government, would you still say governing? They have a regulatory body of checking in with businesses in a really thorough way to ensure that they are queer safe and queer, like a safer space for queer folks. And as a business, they do a lot of education and a lot of like thorough check-ins, and they have a lot of resources on their website. Um, I don't know if there's a equivalent in the States. I'm Canadian. I am Rainbow registered. So I've been through the process myself. Um, and yeah, they have lots of awesome resources, very wonderful. I found it to be a really good organization. Let's see. Within movement spaces, there's definitely been times where I will walk in the door, and let's say if this is the teacher at the desk or whoever's at the desk, will say, "Hey ladies, hey guys." Um, Immediately right there is a bit of a barrier for some folks. Um, Assuming gender or using gendered language is one of the ones that I know there is a lot of resistance to. I don't really want to hear about it right now. I know there's a lot of resistance to it, and it's really important. Language is not more important than human beings' feelings. Like the language is not more important than a human being's safety. So if you are like, oh no, it's so hard, I always use the word guys and I mean it this way, that doesn't matter. Intention is different than impact. Your intention could be that you mean it in a gender inclusive way. However, that is not the way that it is commonly used. That is not the way that everybody uses it. And it's not very obvious because it is a gendered word. And so you could totally use the word guys with your friends who know that and are okay with it if you've had that conversation. But to use it for strangers is ignoring the impact that your words can have. That's the first place this stuff comes up. Another place that might even be before the student walks into the studio is on any kind of social media. If it is always straight couples, always cis couples, if there's never queer folks, queer voices, if there's never, if you have, some studios will do this thing where they have like examples from students. They're like, oh, this student, this is why she comes to practice. This student, this is why he comes to practice, whatever. Like if it's always a certain look, if there's never ever queer representation, it doesn't feel super inclusive. And also, you have to be a little careful with what is the word where you are with tokenism, having a token queer person. It's always the same person, and the intentions are, oh, if I show this one person that I'm queer, I'm like queer inclusive. It's way more than just this work. Like this is just like barely scraping the surface. You have to do a lot more work, and you can't just do like a pride post once a year and then call yourself inclusive. There's so much more work that has to happen. So just being really mindful of why you're presenting certain things, of what you're presenting, and what else you're doing. Because we don't want to just be putting like a rainbow sticker on the door and then being like, oh yeah, I'm queer inclusive, but not doing any work. Um, because that's a lot of the times where harm will be caused. That's why things like rainbow registration is helpful because they check in that you're not actually just doing the sticker on the door. Um, so languaging at the desk, hey ladies, hey guys, also assuming pronouns. You could ask pronouns if it's comfortable. Um, or you don't have to ask necessarily. You could have a spot on if you have a sign-in form. You could also have the option for folks to change their mind, to build that into whatever system you're using. You could have an option where you say, I don't know. Or someone could write in their own pronouns, right? It could be using just opting for gender neutral language in general when you're not sure. So say a group of students come in and you say you have two people at the desk and you both have to sign people into the gym or whatever. We're saying, hey, could you grab this group of students and sign them in? Rather than like, hey, could you grab these ladies' sign-in information? Right? There's like a same, still feels like a kind way of speaking, but you're speaking in a way that it's very inclusive. You're not assuming anyone's gender. You're not assuming anything. Basically, don't assume is one of the main parts of this. Um, Anytime you're having conversation around, like I know some, small talk, like, oh, what are you up to this weekend? Not assuming that if the person you're speaking to has a partner, not assuming it's the opposite gender. Like, and I know I'm as a non-binary person, I'm very well aware that there's gender is a spectrum, it's not binary, but just for the sake of this, if they are a woman, that they're not assuming that their partner is a man. Um, like what's their name? What are you and your partner doing? What are you two up to later? You know what I mean? Like there's ways of speaking about it that's not assuming anything. And it's just one way of speaking that really doesn't exclude folks because those things to someone who's non-queer might seem like a small thing, but there's these microaggressions that build and build and build and build, and they have a big impact. It can be I mean, honestly, I would challenge that kind of mindset and say it is a small thing for you as a studio owner or you as a teacher to change so that someone can feel more welcome in your space. Like I know in terms of classes, it's a little tricky depending on what you're teaching to give exact examples, but not assuming that everyone in the room who identifies as woman has a uterus and has a period. Um, Not assuming they all have period cramps. Like I've had some times where people will be teaching a class that looks like it's all women and say, oh, for period, when you get period cramps, this posture is good. Like, great, that education of like these are things you can do for menstrual cramps is great. But we want to make sure we're using language around it that is inclusive, not assuming like, hey, everyone, all you ladies in the room, this is good for period cramps. You just say, hey, for anyone who experiences menstrual cramps, this is really helpful. Anyone who experiences period cramps, this is helpful. Cool. Even if there's people in the room that don't, appear to have a period or don't have a period, it's still interesting information to know because they probably, if they don't have a period, they probably know someone who does, and they can help them with it if they feel like it. On the same vein, if you offer anything that's like pre-postnatal, switching the languaging around gender and pregnancy. So not always assuming it's mother for many reasons. One of them is that not everyone, even if someone is cis woman, like born, like they're cis is like they still identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Um, they might not be choosing to keep the baby themselves or parent the baby themselves, and it can feel quite traumatic for many, many reasons for that language to be like for you to assume that they are a mother without there being a conversation. It could be as quick, like as easy as like, do you feel comfortable with this language when you're checking in? And then yeah, go ahead, use that language. But if it's a thing where people are dropping in, just say pregnant people, people with uteruses, pre-postnatal classes, and not having gender within it. Um, Another thing that is prevalent in these spaces, and my personal feelings about it are a little bit confusing. It's things like women's circles. I know that I don't, I've been to some and I don't know the whole history um, behind them. I don't know if there is a history of it being like cultural appropriation. So I would first of all look into that, but also anything that is like I'm all for there being spaces that are safer for women and safer for um like I'm not saying that like women's shelters shouldn't exist or anything like that. Like these spaces should exist. There should be spaces for that is safer for women. And when it is this type of thing where it's like women's circles, it as someone who's non-binary, I even identify as a woman as well. Like I don't like girl, I identify as woman, I am non-binary. I immediately feel excluded with that languaging. Like I wouldn't go out of my way to sign up to it. Unless there is also built in some sort of like women and gender non-conforming. But even that still is like, eh. Um, this more so comes up if you're a person who does, say you take one-on-one clients and you primarily work with cis women or you primarily work with women. If you say that immediately, like if I'm a ladies coach, I immediately am not going to go to that space. It does not feel inclusive. If you're preferring, I don't like the word ladies. I don't know how to identify as a lady. I feel immediately excluded from that space, despite the fact that I might be welcome there. The languaging will turn me away from it. So just being mindful of anything like that, like ladies' night or women's classes, or I'm a women's coach. Like I know that you might be like, oh, it's a mouthful. Whatever. Let it be a mouthful. Let it be a mouthful if you're helping other people feel included. Um, so those are some changes you can make. I'm not going to give you too many because I have an event coming up where you'll hear more. But I just wanted to do a little intro because I don't think I need to talk about why it's important. But I mean, I guess I could. I have many other podcast episodes about queer inclusivity. There's a couple of episodes. Oh, there's one episode, I don't even know how long ago it was. It was with Catherine, and we talk about how we figured out we were non-binary. Catherine is also non-binary, and I can't remember if there's a couple of others. There's a couple of episodes with quite a few episodes with queer guests, including a couple of episodes with trans guests where we talk specifically about trans healthcare and trans health and trans safety. Um, I've posted about it fairly frequently on social media. And one of the reasons I feel like I've made my voice slightly louder in this area recently, I still have imposter syndrome come up because anyway, um, actually, no, this is tied together. Been more vocal about it. I've always in the back of my brain felt like, oh, I'm not queer enough to talk about this. Um, which at its core is implicit or internalized anti-queer bias. Um, and is something that comes up with a lot of folks, or maybe we don't feel queer enough, we don't feel whatever enough to talk about it. And a while back, like a year ago, I made a video on Instagram that just said like my name and my pronouns and my preferred language around gendered language. Like I'm fine with being I like identify as a woman. I don't like the word lady. I don't like the word girl. Um, I'm fine with like sister, mother, I can't remember the other things right now, but there was a lot of comments from people who were hateful comments and bullying comments about it. And like the amount of times I've heard people be like, "Oh, it's not they them, that's plural." Um, where people are arguing that the like English language rules are more important than someone's safety. Um, which first of all, they're not even breaking language rules because if someone left something at the studio and you didn't know who it was like yoga mat, and you're like, oh, a student left this here. I'm just going to leave it at the desk for them. I hope they come back. Notice how you're using they them language around that. We do this all the fucking time. So calm down for anyone who's has that as their argument. Um, but also, I'm um, I'm older now. I'm in my 30s now. I'm in a space where I feel safer in my skin and I have um a lot of I have the privilege of having safety in my life to talk about this. And I didn't always feel safe to talk about this. And I didn't always really even know that this languaging was an option, that it was okay to, there was, I didn't exactly grow up in a time where it was like super queer inclusive. Um, but there are, and not that it is necessarily queer inclusive now, particularly with stuff happening with the election. Um, that's why it's fucking important because there are so many queer folks, whether they're kids, they're teens, they're adults, there's so many queer folks who do not have safety. It is not a given that they can go into a space and be safe and not be bullied or harassed. It is not a given that they can go home for the holidays or they can um, apply for jobs or whatever and be safe. And it costs you barely anything to do the bare minimum of learning how to be a safer person or a safer studio. But the impact it has is fucking enormous. Not only for, like, if you're really doing the work, a student should not only be able to go into the studio or into your class knowing that your intentions and your actions will demonstrate their safety, but that you also have their back. So it's not just about how you interact in the space, but how you hold the space. So you have a zero tolerance policy for anti-queer um, bullying or hatred. That you will, remove that from the space or remove those people from the space or educate or build raise queer voices. You maybe have specifically queer events happening, um, or you're educating about it, or you're listening to others. That has a huge fucking impact. And does not cost you much. You also, that said, should pay for queer voices and pay queer people for educating you, and also not assume that they should be doing it. There is sometimes this barrier that comes up. Well, like, oh, well, if they don't feel included, they should tell me. They should tell me how to be better. Or you specifically ask the queer people, expecting them to do that labor. They don't owe you the labor. There is so many people out here doing this work of educating teachers and spaces or whatever individuals to be more queer inclusive. You don't have to make it somebody else's job, and you should pay for them. So I'm going to segue that into saying on December 2nd, I'm offering a free webinar with my wonderful friend Shannon Crow, who you heard from a couple episodes back. And we're going to be talking about queer inclusivity in movement spaces. It is hosted by Offering Tree, so you should be able to find it either on Offering Tree's website or their social media. I will also post about it, so you can check out there. If you can't find it, send me a message, but it should be pretty easy to find. And not only that, it's going to be a 1 hour free webinar. Is it 1 hour? I think so. Then in January, I'm hosting a workshop. Is it 5 hours, 6 hours, 5 hours plus a 1 hour lunch workshop, all about queer inclusivity. And we're going to go in depth with some of the stuff we talked about today, some of the stuff we're going to talk about on the 2nd, and we're going to go in depth on January 20th. And you can get 5 continuing education hours for it through Yoga Alliance. And it is so fucking important. There's a payment plan option for any folks out there who identify as queer and are interested in this training. I encourage you to reach out to me about sliding scale options, or scholarships. And let's see, if you're a studio and you're interested in putting this on for your studio and your student, or not your students, well, maybe your students, but your teachers, there's the word, you can reach out to me, info@movewithbilly.com, or there's like an email form on my website too, that you can put that in there. This is what I'm interested in. We could do it on Zoom, we could do it in person, depending on where you are. And then you can join me for that. And then I'll just have one more little tidbit, which doesn't really have to do with any of the stuff we've talked about. But if you live in Prince Edward County, Ontario, in January and February, I'm going to be doing in-person classes for the first time in a while. First time in this area, and I would love to have you join me. You can find that all that information on my website under Work With Me. So movewithbilly.com. All of that stuff is there. If you have any questions, if you want to share your story, if you want to be a guest on the podcast, send me an email, info@movewithbilly.com. Thank you so much for your time and your space, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.